want to do a book review today of the last few books that I've read. These guys. So, Dodging Vampires, this book is, it's kind of a book for, like, it's written for, like, middle-aged women, honestly. But I found it at, actually, a middle-aged lady's house when I was working. Well, she was paying me for work, and I was sitting on her couch. And I do work on her property and little carpentry jobs and help her out sometimes. And, well, she helps me out too. It's a win-win deal. Like, that's what it's all about. Capitalism is all about win-win deals, not win-lose deals, where one guy gets to win, the other guy gets to lose. It's win-win. You engage in it if you want to. You engage in it if it's your best interest. If it's not in your best interest, you can just say no. And yeah, so Dodging Vampires is a book about, it's a book that's written mainly directed at middle-aged women who are in these relationships that are not win-win relationships. They're win-lose relationships. It's a relationship where one person is like so like giving, and oftentimes they're very intelligent and resourceful and like sensitive, and so this would usually be like the example of like the middle-aged woman who's maybe like, it could be a relationship with like their husband or their boss, and it's not just middle-aged women, it can happen to guys too, and I don't know, it just happens. So there was a couple passages that I wanted to read from it. Okay, so the first one is, remember the monks we talked about in chapter 4? She's talking about the Tibetan monks that got like their, like, it's really bad what happened. Like they got like everything like taken from them. Okay, so remember the monks we talked about in chapter 4? They turned to compassion instead of expressing anger, and they got diabetes in the process. This is similar to what an empath does. Instead of leaving or fighting, the empath tries to live according to spiritual practices such as loving kindness, empathic joy, celebrating the success of others, compassion, wanting to end the suffering of all beings, and equanimity. I don't know how to pronounce that. EQUANIMITY. Living in harmony and peace of mind. Guess what's that? That's what that means. This certainly seems not only not only reasonable, but also laudable. But there's that big problem of our immune systems having morals. They won't allow us to bypass righteous anger when our innocence or that of a loved one is threatened. The proper response in these situations is anger and action. And if you don't act on this anger, you become drained, tired, and stressed, with all the corresponding rises in stress hormones. Let's look at an example. You see that your child is about to be harmed by an adult. Your response is to get angry with the abuser and get your child out of harm's way. You don't say, "We are all one," or "May all beings be free of suffering," or make excuses for the abuser. He had a difficult childhood, so I understand why he's taking it out on my child. No, doing any of these things would be a crime. Instead, you do what needs to be done to protect your child. And your body acts accordingly, pumping you full of the necessary energizing stress hormones to handle the situation. Once the situation has been handled, those hormone levels return to homeostasis. To maintain your health and peace of mind, you must tap into your righteous anger at allowing yourself to be used and abused. Don't do that. In the instance of vampire relationships, this means that you must either get out or minimize time spent with the other person, and you must realize that being spiritual and unconditionally loving does not mean putting up with abuse of any kind. Being in a toxic relationship may be a sign of unconditional love, but it's also a sign that you love them more than yourself. That is a sign of mental illness. And, okay, and the other passage I wanted to read is this. This is cool. This is actually how she, I just realized it's actually how she ends the book. And I think it's mostly really good. She says, I strongly believe that in the next decade we are going to see new kinds of leaders. Integrity is going to come roaring back. In business, in politics, in families. I already see it happening. Our leaders will be here to serve the collective, not rob it or dupe it. And the rising consciousness of humanity will no longer be swayed by vicious, negative campaigning. We will have had enough. And slowly, ever so slowly, that edge that vampires have had for centuries will go away. We will be living our lives as whole beings, from the inside out. We will know darkness when we see it and feel it, and we will no longer feed it on any level. Watch for governments to change. The first that does, it will be a breath of fresh air. Others will follow. Businesses will compete with each other for who has the most integrity. The zero-sum model, which means there's only so much to go around, so I win, you lose, will be replaced by nature's model. There's enough for everyone. Okay, and then here's these two books too. Doug Casey and John Hunt, Speculator. And then also Doug Casey and John Hunt, Drug Lord. Okay, so the first one is Speculator, and this is when we get to know the protagonist, which is he's a kid from San Diego who he's a really bright kid. He doesn't graduate high school. He drops out and he decides not to go to college, but he has a financial mindset like from a young age, and he's interested in naturally he's interested in making money and becoming a success, and he has a very strong moral compass. Okay, so speculating it's new to me, but it's similar to investing in that it's a money move where you take some of your money and you make a move in an effort to try and grow it. Except speculating is different, because speculating is when you seek to profit off of politically caused distortions in the marketplace. And it's pretty cool because you can make a lot of money speculating with a good speculation. As Bob Dylan once put it in his album Oh Mercy, we live in a political world. So speculating makes more sense than investing today, because markets really aren't free and you can't make as much money as an investor as you can as a speculator. So yeah, pretty much I haven't really focused on money like at all that much in my life. Not really. This book is pretty inspiring. It kind of changes it kind of has had a big influence on my, I don't know, on my psychology and my basically understanding of general concepts. Like it's really cool in how it talks about money, and money really isn't a testament to how bad of a guy you are. You can be making money, and ideally, actually always, if you're not defrauding someone or using force against someone, and you're doing honest transactions, then your money really is a testament to what you have provided. Assuming like you're being honest. So making money is, making money's cool. Oh, another cool thing about this book is it talks about America as not being a landmass, like, but it's actually an idea that you should do whatever the heck you want if you're not harming anyone. That really is all it is. It's sad, but it is kind of a forgotten idea. Though I do have faith that it can be revived. I believe that it's possible anyways. Yeah. I don't know. He's a young guy that just wants to make money. And he has a strong moral compass. And he goes to Africa because his like Uncle Maurice, who's like kind of like he's kind of like Batman's butler, like, but not as like I wouldn't call it vanity. And so he goes to Africa because he owns a bunch of these stocks in this mining company that claims to have found the biggest gold deposit like on Earth, and like it's because like they said that the gold like is like there's tiny fragments of it like in this deposit, and they're just like they're not concentrated, so you have to like through a certain filtration process like get all the gold and put it together. It's like almost like dynamite fishing. No, it's different from that. That's what it like. So that's the claim is of what the company made, and they said, oh, with our calculations, we have the biggest gold deposit on Earth. Or no, and so Charles Knight found out that he owned shares of this company. I think that was from Maurice. Like, so he went to Africa. He goes to Africa, like instead of going to college. He goes to Africa and he chooses to like check out this company that he holds a lot of shares in, and he gets a tour, and he's like kind of like he meets his friend, and he meets like a mentor guy who's like, well, he's not the old man that he looks like, I'll say that much. Like, this movie is cool, like, or not movie, it could be a movie. Him and his newly found mentor, Xander, they bounce ideas back and forth, and they know that they bounce ideas back and forth, and they know that they suspect that there's something fishy going on with this mining company, and so they kind of like they're interested, and they kind of follow the trail of breadcrumbs, so to speak, and they find out that it's actually like a fraud, and the guys running the mining company I think it's called BF. Is it called BF or BS? I don't know. I forget the name of the mining company. BF. It's called BF. The guys at BF, they decide that they are going to cash out, defraud all the investors, take the money, and run. And they're going to cover up their trail with starting a war in Africa, in Gondwana specifically. And they realize this shit. They figure it out. And Charles naturally seeks to profit off of this. He says, oh, wow, this is crazy. Essentially, you're willing to steal You're willing to steal from society because you can get away with it. That's pretty much what Charles says, or what he comes to realize. And so he goes, oh, well, I own all these shares, so I am going to short them. They don't respect him. They actually hate him. Yeah. It's kind of messed up because well, he's just like, I don't know, they hate him because he invalidates them. And people don't like to be invalidated. Here's another passage which it's awesome. It's when Charles meets the captain. Charles tried to size the man up. The captain stood tall, a model of the modern Viking. He was handsome, naturally intimidating, and possessed a strong but unthreatening voice. He looked like he could be the king of Denmark, to whom he might be related, considering the small total number of Danes. The man had the aura of an alpha male, but something about Freeburg's smile made Charles wonder if, in fact, he was a less common gamma like Charles himself. Charles knew that scientists experimenting with rats discovered there were leaders, alphas, and followers, betas. A small number of alphas staked out the best mates, the best territories, and ruled over the passive betas, which were the large majority. By nature aggressive, alphas had their confidence amplified within the confines and culture of a pack. They needed the betas to pay them homage. Pretty obvious, no Nobel Prize for figuring that out, but Charles never felt like either an alpha or a beta. But then, scientists found that another type existed, gammas, who were relatively rare. Gamma rats possess all the capabilities of alphas, including garnering the best mates and territories, but gammas felt no need to lord over the betas. Gammas did not demand the pack culture to validate their feelings of self-worth, and the alphas didn't intimidate them. They lived, if you will, as get along, go along, libertarian rats. The pattern held true throughout the higher animal kingdom, and the higher a species' intelligence, the more pronounced it was. So that is good, and those are just people that you want to be around. Okay, here's another passage about so-called, take it as you will, so-called reprehensible professions. First on the list of reprehensible professions is the politician. They seek to acquire the legal power to enforce their will on others. Success in politics requires being a superb liar, a willingness to betray trust, and no compunctions about initiating force. There's a greater concentration of narcissistic sociopaths in politics than any other occupation. The whole object of politics is to gain power over the people. But Mr. Springer, isn't that, and this is a dialogue between a Mr. Springer and the woman who is really, she is tricky. She's like, her name's Sabina, and she is kind of born into this like ecosystem, the manipulative ecosystem, like from a young age, and she's conditioned by it, and she's like really hot. So she has, I don't know what you could say, assets that are desirable to many, and she's intelligent, and at the same time though, she is dumb because she doesn't respect, she doesn't really respect the human spirit.
But Mr. Springer, this is Sabina talking, isn't that kind of an unfair generalization? Just as you said with used car salesmen, not all politicians are like this. You are correct to correct me. No, wait, sorry. You are right to correct me. Some very few politicians are trying to decrease the power of their colleagues, and fraud is not always required to succeed. So your critique is fair, but the objective of a used car salesman is only to sell cars and make money. The object of a politician is power over others, enforced by men with guns. It necessarily attracts the most morally ambiguous types. Oh, and then it goes on down here. Springer wondered if she had learned anything. You seem to have missed the basic point I'm trying to make. The issue is not whether someone is rich or poor, weak or powerful, but whether someone initiates force or fraud against the innocent. Increasingly in our society, people have come to accept that the ends justify the means, and therefore government should be allowed to do pretty much anything. This is, of course, the road to socialism and fascism, leading to a society like those under Stalin, Hitler, Mao, Pol Pot, and 100 others like them. Okay, the next book that I read is Drug Lord. This was my most recent book I read. It's cool. It's the same character, Charles Knight. He comes back like 7 years later, I believe. Comes back to the United States after pretty much getting everything taken from him, and he wants to exercise his belief in the American dream, and in this particular case, he gets into the pharma industry. He starts selling pharmaceutical drugs both legally and illegally, and it points out sort of a lot of the hypocrisy within the FDA and how it just doesn't really work. It doesn't actually, it's like completely corrupted. Like, here's a little passage about it. From what you've told me, the FDA is one enormous conflict of interest. Scientists and bureaucrats game the system to get jobs with Big Pharma later. Big Pharma uses the FDA to set up stumbling blocks for small companies, either because it wants to quash any competition, or because it wants to buy them out on the cheap when they're near bankruptcy. So that's that. Here's another little passage from it. Racism exists mostly as a matter of class and culture, but has its biological roots as well. Most small primitive tribes call themselves people in their own language, while using a different word for outsiders, a word that made outsiders seem somewhat less than human. It made sense from an evolutionary point of view. Those outside your group had to be viewed as a potential threat, intent on stealing your property, or worse. Thus, humans have been genetically programmed for hundreds of thousands of years to discriminate based on superficial indicators such as skin tone. Higher cognitive functioning was usually required to overcome such biological programming. Such higher functioning could be found in individuals but not in groups. Racism still had some survival value, but its origins lay in groupthink and collectivism. Okay. When you produce more than you consume and you pocket the difference, the name for that difference is capital. In other words, it is the difference between what one makes and one takes. It is usually represented as money or some kind of currency. Okay, assuming you aren't using force to impose your will on your customers and you are not defrauding them in any way, then your capital stands as a testament to how much you have provided to society. That, or how skillful / lucky you have been in shuffling your money around. Either way, in the big picture, Capital ultimately stands as a testament of how much one has given to society. This is the complete opposite to the more popular belief that my peers and some professors I've had seem to hold on to, which is that the more money you have, then the more wealth you have sucked out of society. It is understandable why they believe this when some of the largest corporations and wealthiest people have achieved their wealth through inhumane ways of using fraud and force, either directly or indirectly with their allies. A classic and well-known example of this would be a defense contractor who relies on tax dollars to get paid. This one is a double whammy because not only are they relying on society's inability to say no to get paid, the service they provide, war, doesn't create capital. It actually destroys it. It is imperative when discussing concepts or communicating in general that terms be used appropriately. To call a capitalist a thief isn't strictly speaking true. That's like saying a Russian Olympic athlete is a cheater. Here's an example of honest capitalism. Say your uncle, named Sam, ran a market where he sells organic produce. Each week when a shipment comes in from the local farms and it costs, say, $10,000 a week. In an ideal week, he sells all of that produce for a total of $14,000. The capital gained in that week is $4,000. That $4,000 represents the value that he provided that week. He was a link in the chain, so to speak, between the farm and the table. If a customer wanted to buy a few tomatoes and a few dozen eggs with a total price tag of $10, they have came to the conclusion that it is in their best interest to purchase because they have decided that the tomatoes and eggs are worth more to them than the $10 bill in their pocket, and so they are willing to trade, and hence the transaction occurs. These transactions should occur because there's really no such thing as a free lunch. It's either on someone's dime or on someone's time. Though I also do want to add that like perennial cropping and intelligent farming, like in this case, can help that ratio of input to output energy a lot. When you honor a human being's innate right to say yes or no to decisions regarding their own body and their own property, you are creating a world which allows them to demonstrate their own evolution. This is true on every level. And as the real economists teach, it's true economically as well. This is how we co-create a world where people must take responsibility for their actions. A world where there is no tyranny to defy. Back in 1833, William Foster Lloyd noticed something interesting about so-called common pastures. Pastures without an owner that could be used by everyone. He noticed that these were in much worse shape than pastures with private owners. Why? Well, because the short-term self-interest of the people using the common pastures made them simply use too many resources, whereas the pastures which were privately owned were in good shape. This is because it was in the private owner's best interest to not only produce as much as possible, but to do so in a sustainable manner over the long term. And I see this as a great looking glass into the natural human trait called greed. And in this context, one might ask, how would society engineer itself, or to put it in more understandable or common terms, how should we engineer society? Should we do so in a way that greed destroys valuable resources, or should we do so in a way that greed is only satisfied with ingenuity and responsible stewardship? The latter seems to dissolve all of the
negativity that we often associate with greed. Boundaries are always changing. Everything is always moving. What's not changing are the meanings of the word yes and no. This is how we draw the line, so to speak. This is the line, and we must communicate with the trespasser when a violation occurs, assuming it is safe to do so. Oftentimes we can do so with kindness. We mustn't always enforce this line with cruelty. Mistakes do happen, and some people come from rougher situations or are somehow more blinded than others. It is a learning experience. Also, consequences mustn't be asymmetrical. The punishment should match the crime. If you're down with having your friends in the neighborhood come over your house like all the time, no need to ask, that's great. If not, say something. A classic example of an asymmetrical consequence would be someone who is deeply stuck on the right side of the right-left paradigm who literally shoots someone for simply stepping on his property. To use lethal force in such a matter is way out of line and would probably result in that man losing many, many allies. At least allies that have become prosperous in a world that wouldn't tolerate initiating fraud or force against a human being's body or property.